So you want to make an original story, right? I might not be an expert, but I think I have some tips that might help you at least get started. Or at least I hope so. Because if nothing in this video is useful, then there was no point in me making this. Grab a snack, grab a drink, come join me as I try and share some knowledge with you. Hello and welcome back to my channel. Hope you're doing well. The big reason art has always been fun for me is because I've always, since the beginning of me drawing, have loved creating my own characters and my own stories, even if when I was younger they weren't good because I was a child, and they're basically just rip-offs of my favorite series, but now I'd like to think I have a fairly good grasp on creating— Did you just hear my elbow crack? My goodness. Now I'd like to think I have a fairly good grasp on at least creating a story concept, if not like writing a more in-depth story. And a big staple on my channel, or at least I like to think it's a big staple, is my original characters and my original stories. Speaking of though, before we get started, this character is a part of the story that I just finished talking about last month. I didn't get a chance to talk about this character in the series because she is fairly new and I don't have enough developed of her yet to talk about her in her own in-depth video, but I really like her, so I wanted to make a picture of her that goes with that series of characters and their videos. So that's why it looks similar to— was it last week's video? I'm going to go with it, last week's video. But if you want to hear about that story, it's about witches and magical fun stuff, so I'll leave that in the iCard for you to check out that playlist. But just thought I would touch on that before anybody gets confused. This isn't an OC video, don't worry, I got you. Another disclaimer I want to give really quick: this isn't a video about how to physically make a graphic novel or how to physically make or write a story. This is more of why you should create a story if creating a story is of interest to you, how to create a concept, how to improve a concept, how to start mapping things out in your head, and anything along those lines. As far as like physically making a comic or a novel or anything like that, that is an entirely different story. This isn't about like writing out scenes or organizing scenes in a way to make your story flow. This is mostly about creating an original world, where to get started, how to create a plot, and how to get started with that, how to fit your characters in that world, and all of that stuff. That I have a lot more experience with, rather than actually physically making a graphic novel or a comic, whatever you want to call it. So that's not what this video is about. This is more of if you have characters that you don't know what to do with, or if you would like to make a story but don't know where to start, that's more of what this video is. So I guess the best place I can start with giving advice is talking about why you should make a story. This isn't necessarily me trying to convince you that like making stories is the greatest thing ever and that you should do it, even though I do find it quite fun. I do think that it is important to pinpoint why exactly you want to make a story, and no one reason is necessarily better than another. I just think it is important to identify why you do want to create a story, because that can change your approach. It can change how you feel about your story. It can change how much you work on it, how little you work on it, how many stories you have, and stuff like that. There are so many reasons why a person might want to make a story, but I decided to share reasons that I have created story concepts in the past and still currently do. So maybe it'll help you figure out why it is exactly that you want to make one. That wasn't a sentence, but we're gonna roll with it because this is my channel. Fuck professionalism. So I think the most basic and I guess fairly obvious reason to start a story is that it helps to improve your creativity. Obviously, storytelling is a creative media. It's a creative thing, especially if you're someone like me who is both an artist and a writer. Many of you know I am currently working on a webcomic behind the scenes. I write that myself. I'm illustrating it myself. Nothing is out yet, nobody asked me, but it's all entirely on my own. It helps to get my writing creative juices flowing. It helps to get my artistic creative juices flowing. It helps me come up with a lot more of creative problem solving, trying to think of things in a way that I wouldn't normally think of them. I think it's very common for artists to draw the same things over and over again or return to similar concepts, and I am no different from that. I'd like to think the more and more I practice, I'm getting farther away from that, but I think considering a person's personal tastes and everything like that, it's only natural that they tend to gravitate towards those things. But working on a story or a comic helps you to kind of break out of that and makes you practice things you wouldn't normally practice. And by creating a story concept or creating a world for your characters to live in, it helps you to learn more rules rules about anything from character design to world building to storytelling. It helps you to learn those rules, and it helps you to learn how to break those rules in a way that is effective. Talking about rules when it comes to writing and art is very strange because generally speaking, there are a list of guidelines and a list of rules that you should follow and a list of things that you should and should not do. But also, that being said, you absolutely don't have to follow any of those if there's a purpose for it and if it's in a way that makes sense. And I guess that kind of leads in nicely to the next reason, and that's it helps you to draw more and to fill out a sketchbook. Obviously, if you are creating a story, you're gonna need characters, and you're also probably going to need some recurring places. You're probably going to need some maybe recurring objects. I don't know. I'll explain that in a little bit. But any like recurring places, recurring objects, recurring logos, anything along those lines, there are endless possibilities for you to draw. I didn't think that sentence through before I said it. But what else is new? I have many sketchbook tour videos on my channel. I have many sketch vlog videos on my channel. Many of the sketch vlogs and all of my sketchbook tours, you could watch those and you can see me doing this live on camera. Well, not live, but previously live on camera and then edited. The stories that I have are all stories that I have had for years. And so as a result, I have been working on their character designs in my sketchbook for years. I have been working on locations in their stories for years. I have worked on world building for their stories for years, and you get the point. I have filled up so many sketchbooks because I have so many stories that I would like to share one day. And sometimes when you don't know what to draw, you do have that world for you to sort of fall back on. Currently, right now, many of you know that one of my stories is under construction, you can say. So I am going to be working in my sketchbook to work on their designs. I have worked in the past on a restaurant that is fairly infamous for longtime viewers on my channel, but don't worry, that is staying, so I'll probably have to work on that design to make it fit the new environment. And since I am currently revamping Andy's story and everything, and I said it's going to be set in a more futuristic world, I have to work on more of technology that's going to be in their world and stuff that really helps tell a story about their world without having to show the whole world, if I guess that makes sense. Like, one thing that I thought of playing around with is these sort of almost futuristic roller skate heely things. I haven't actually physically drawn anything yet, but that is something I'm going to be working on in my sketchbook. So if you're a person who often runs out of things to draw, trying to create a story might be the thing for you. And I guess the last thing that kind of caps up all of that is that it helps with boredom. If you don't have anything to do, you got that. And honestly, I think about my stories so much. It's not even when I'm just drawing, because I'm almost constantly thinking about my stories and ways that they could go, what to improve on. For my more developed universe, maybe mapping out scenes in my head, thinking about how the characters are going to interact and stuff like that. I think the most common place I do this is when I go to bed. I usually fall asleep thinking about my characters and being like, but what if I did this? Or it's like, what would happen if this happened? Technically speaking, that does mean that I'm always working, but I like it. It helps keep me occupied, even in moments where I'm not actually drawing anything. So if you're a bored person, maybe this is the thing for you. So before you actually physically start making anything for your story concept, your world, whatever you would like to call it, I would just try and figure out why it is exactly you want to make a story. I think once you figure that out, aside from helping you with your approach and everything, like I said earlier, I do think it'll also help you become a little bit more excited for it. Another reason that I didn't exactly mention is you want to make a webcomic or a graphic novel, which of course, actually making that is a whole other process, but I do think all of this is sort of applicable to a situation where you want to make a webcomic, because if you do want to make something like that, it all starts somewhere. And even the comic that I'm currently trying to make behind the scenes, it didn't just pop out of my head one day and I started making a webcomic. It's a concept and it's stories that I've sat on for a while, and eventually that leaked into me making a webcomic. So if you do want to make a webcomic, I've said webcomic way too many times, if that is what you want to try and make, I would still recommend starting from a fairly simple place like this. So, all that said, how do you actually go about making one? What a great question, and a question that is the whole reason you're watching this video for. It's because you want to know the answer to that question. Kind of like the reasons for wanting to create a world for your characters and to create a story for them. There's not really one answer on how to make one. One answer isn't necessarily better than the others. It's honestly entirely dependent from person to person, what works best for you, how you work as both a writer and an artist. But assuming that you have zero concepts in your head, here's some advice from me on how to start creating a concept for a story from scratch. I think the most basic way to start is to look at different media that you like and see what sort of sparks ideas in your head in terms of genre, the length of a series or franchise or whatever, etc. Just think about what it is that you like. So for example, personally, I don't like things that are very much set in the real world, quote unquote. I do enjoy watching things like that, and I do enjoy watching things like slice of life, but I don't particularly enjoy making that, and that's something that I came to recently, which threw me into a little bit of a crisis, but being able to realize that is what is making me work on making Andy's universe a world that I actually enjoy creating, and it's going really well so far. I prefer a lot of fantasy adventure type genres, so that's what I typically make. Alternatively, I also really enjoy character design, and so I usually enjoy shows or games or movies that have a large cast of characters. While I do think having a larger cast of characters is much more difficult to write because it makes it harder for you to differentiate character from character and making each character feel fleshed out and feel like their own person. Personally, I just really love designing characters. I love having a wide cast of characters, which is why it's fairly rare for me to just have like 2 or 3 main characters in a story and then have that be that. I think out of my, 5 or so stories, I think only 2 of them have like 3 main characters, which is still debatably too many. Just figure out what it is that you like. This isn't something that is always done in a day, though, because like I said, I recently came to the conclusion that while I like watching things like slice of life or things set in a world that's just our world and there's nothing like fantastical or magical about it, I don't like writing that stuff. And Andy's universe, the characters that I keep mentioning in this video so far, I made Andy when I was 16 and have been working on their story not too long after I started adding more and more characters to their world. And I am now 21, so I have been working on their concept and their world for literal years before I realized I didn't like it as much anymore. And then alternatively, we have my characters like Jeremy and Aurora, where the world that they live in is essentially the same as when I first created them when I was 11. So it could really go either way, and so don't worry too much about figuring things out today, basically. Just allow yourself time because these things do take time. I guess alternatively, you can also look at things that you haven't done yet. So I'm a person who has quite a few characters and quite a few stories, right? Subscribers of my channel will know that, but I'll be the first to say that there are some similar elements here and there, such as like a fantasy like environment, because that's just the stuff that I like. If we look at my webcam, the characters like Delaney, Lo, that whole cast of characters, and then we have characters from my witch universe like Arietta, Robin, all of them, even though it isn't exactly the same due to the existence of beasts in my webcomic universe and witches in my witches universe. Each of those do have some sort of magic system in place, and I'm not spoiling anything for the comic, but there are some characters in the comic that might have some similar abilities to characters from Arietta and Robin's universe. That in itself isn't necessarily a bad thing, it really just goes about the execution and making them each feel like their own thing, if that makes sense. But then on the other hand, I also have stories like Aspin's universe, where it takes place in an almost apocalyptic universe. I did it. And then the world that I'm working on now is very much sci-fi, which are 2 things that I haven't really done before. And since those are 2 things that I haven't done before, it really makes me come up with new ideas, come up with new character designs and things like that. And if you have characters already, but you don't have a story for them, you can also try and start structuring a world based off of their appearance, and then eventually a plot will hopefully come out of that. I know I keep using Angie's universe as an example, but I think I'm gonna do that again. If we look at my character Andy, the way that they're dressed isn't necessarily how you would see somebody in our world dress. But then if you look at other characters, like let's say Rory or Mabel, they are dressed in a way that people in our world dress. Andy originally fit in a lot better with the cast originally, I guess would be a good way to put it, before I redesigned them like a year or so ago. They did look a little bit more like a person that you would find in our real world, but then I redesigned them so they have a little bit more stylized hair. Not that their hair wasn't stylized stylist before, and I took a lot more liberties with their fashion sense. And so now, even though their outfit isn't anything super crazy, you do kind of get the vibe just by looking at them that they don't live in a world that's like our own. But then if you were to look at a character like Rory, Mabel, Luca, everybody else in that world pretty much, you would get the vibe that they live in a world like ours, which is why I am also currently redesigning their outfits behind the scenes to make them fit in more with that futuristic world that they now live in. And then I think another example would be my character Arietta, and the same thing goes for her where she doesn't exactly look like she's from our world, but let's say we take Andy and then we take Arietta, even though they both have that vibe that they live in a world different from our own, they still look like they're from two different worlds, if that makes any sense. So if you have a character design, try and figure out why they look the way that they do, because the type of world that they live in does affect how a character would look. Like if your characters do live in a more futuristic world like Andy and the others, then you can pretty much do whatever you want with their fashion sense because we don't know what the future holds. But let's say you have a world that's set in like maybe medieval times, then you wouldn't see a character wearing like jeans and a t-shirt. Really just take a look at your character, also their personality to be honest with you, because all of those things are influenced by the world that they live in, and then once you start thinking about where they come from, a plot is more likely to come to you. But let's say none of that really works for you and you got nothing. One thing that I can suggest is that there are websites that have writing prompts, and there are accounts on various places like Twitter, Instagram, Tumblr, where they give you writing prompts. Personally, I wouldn't suggest taking a prompt as is and then just making that story, because that's not a concept that you came up with, but there is absolutely nothing wrong with skimming those prompts, seeing if something sticks, seeing if anything sparks any ideas. It doesn't even have to be like a fully thought out plot that you come up with from this. It could even be something like, let's say a prompt has something with long lost siblings and you're like, oh, I never had a concept like that before in one of my stories, let me play around with that. Or maybe it's something like, well, this prompt has something to do with like time loops or like time travel or something. Maybe that's something to play around with. Again, I would use this more to just spark ideas instead of coming up with a whole ass plot, but it is something that can help get those gears turning a little bit in your head. And the last tip that I can really give for actually coming up with a plot is just don't force it. If you really want to make a story, then it'll come to you. Trying to sit there and figure everything out, especially in one go, it'll hurt your head, it'll ruin your self-esteem, and it'll not go well. If you feel like you're a little stuck, take a break. Your art isn't going anywhere. You have time. And if anything, trying to force a plot in a world out is only going to make your world and your plot and your characters suffer, because if you try and force it, it'll come out a lot more stiff. It might not make a whole lot of sense. It might not be something you enjoy, so just don't feel like you have to have a story today. Just play around with different concepts, sit on some stuff, and while you're sitting on some stuff, think about things. That was stupid. So let's say you got a story now. You have a general concept. It's not a full-on, like, graphic novel length story, but you got something. But let's say you know it's not perfect. And odds are it's not going to be, because perfection doesn't exist. But let's say you want to improve your current story in your current world, but you're not quite sure how. Here's how I generally go about it. The biggest advice that I can give for this is to ask yourself questions. This is something that is a valid thing to do at any point in your creation process, but if you really want to get that sweet, sweet deep lore and you want to start mapping things out a little bit more clearly, you need to ask yourself questions about your story, question things that don't make sense. You need to figure out the flaws in your story so then you can fix them. Think about your characters and how they are, think about the world and how it is, and think about the plot and what happens, and use all of those things to try and come up with a solution. Actually, I have... Is it in this one? Is it? No. We stand professionalism. So when I was first creating my comic universe, here are some questions that I asked that I totally just didn't spend the last like 2 or 3 minutes trying to find. So I always knew that I wanted my character Delaney to be a prince, right? I had to think about how his family fit into the world. What kind of level of power did they have? I had to think about like the world structure and how he as a prince, like what sort of rule would he have? And eventually I landed on him being the prince of all beasts. And fun little spoiler that you probably could have totally figured out from context clues, there's also another prince who is the prince of humans. And another question that I asked myself is that in this world, beasts and humans live together, they live mixed amongst each other, but in certain areas, humans and beasts get along swimmingly, but then other people have less good views on them. And there are definitely areas where humans and beasts are at conflict. I'd ask myself why, what was the cause of that, and what is the solution, how can things progress from here? There are more, but those are just a couple of examples. I knew I wanted certain things to exist, I knew I wanted certain characters to be a certain way, but at the time when I asked myself these questions, I didn't really have an answer, and it really made me have to think about it, and it made me really have to work to find an answer. Sometimes that was just adding things to the story, sometimes it was removing things from the story, sometimes it was changing things that already existed in the story. Ask yourself these questions, figure out what it is that does and does not make sense, and go from there. And if you don't know exactly what sorts of questions to ask yourself, you can also ask a friend or a family member that you trust. If this is something that you do, I would suggest making your vision known is the best way that I can put that. Explain the plot that you have. Okay, neighbor who just flushed your toilet really loudly. Explain the plot that you have, explain the world structure, talk about some of your characters a little bit, just throw whatever you have at them, ask them their thoughts. Asking for outside opinions can really give you new insights on your story, it can really make you think about things in a different way. And in terms of asking yourself questions on what works and doesn't work, two heads are better than one. You know, they might come up with questions that you yourself might not have necessarily thought of. I remember one time I was talking to my friend about specific scenes in my comic, and one thing that they brought up to me was their concern about pacing. And of course, here I was just reading my notes to them, so the pacing itself wasn't necessarily the best, and it's a lot different when it's in the form of a visual novel, but that is something that I made note of and something that I really tried to work on. Of course, you can't ask these questions for things that aren't necessarily scene-to-scene stuff or overarching timeline stuff. It could just be about your world's structure and the rules of your universe. Another thing that I can really recommend is looking at series that you like, whether it's a TV show, a graphic novel, a movie. Look at stories that you like and dissect them. Think about what makes them work. Break down the characters, break down the plots, break down the scenes, whatever it is that you need to do. Recently, I made a video talking about Julia from Fairy Tail, and I really dissected her character, and I believe I titled the video, How Not to Write Romance. Of course, I could sit there all day and say, Juvia is a poorly written character, but that on its own doesn't really make much sense. That is just a general statement. Think about what about her character does not work, why it doesn't work, what would have worked better. That way, by dissecting that, people who watch the video have a better idea of what to avoid when writing a character. Of course, that was all about what not to do, but by dissecting stuff that you like, you can also very much find what to do with your stories. And something that I mentioned a lot in this video is the set rules of your world. Did I say that weird? I don't know, but it's fine. My throat's kind of giving out, but we're almost done recording, so we're just gonna push through, baby! But when you create rules for your universe, especially in universes where there is like a magic system or like has more futuristic technology or anything like that, it helps give the world structure, it helps give the characters structure because they have rules that they have to follow, it helps to create stakes in your story, it can help create a plot based on the rules that you create, it helps give the characters purpose, it helps give them goals and ambitions. If we're using another one of my stories as an example, I'm so sorry to anyone watching this who has no idea who any of my characters are. But let's take my witch universe. In this universe, witches are humans with magical powers, but in order to access their magical powers, they need something called a tool. A tool on its own is essentially useless, and without a tool, a witch cannot use their power, but then when a witch has a tool, they have the ability to create magic. If a non-witch were to use a tool, nothing would happen, in case anyone was wondering about that. And then also, alternatively, if a witch can use multiple tools at once, that means that they're a very, very strong witch. Having those sorts of rules means that characters have to go about situations in certain ways. It means that they have to use their powers in certain ways and things along those lines. And also by setting rules, you also know how to break those rules. For anyone who is familiar with my stories, you know that the protagonist, Arietta, she does not need a tool to access her power, which is the one rule of the universe, is that witches need a tool to use their powers, and she doesn't. But that in itself creates another rule, because she's an anomaly in this universe, essentially. Something that should not exist in the world does exist. And just how rules can create structure and rules can give characters purpose, this also creates structure, and this also also creates purpose, and this also creates plot, because a big part of the plot is Arietta trying to figure out why she is this way. There's this one rule of the universe that she breaks all the time, and she doesn't know why, and she doesn't know how she got that way. And so her direction is figuring out what happened, and she eventually meets up with the other protagonists of the story, and they join her in figuring that out. And the biggest, most importantest advice that I could give is to be patient with yourself, because my god, a story is not made in a day. I'm not sure who this quote is attributed to, but something that I have heard many, many, many times in my life is that all good books are rewritten. Of course, many of you know, because I mentioned it a bazillion times in this video, I am currently reworking Andy's world and their story, completely scrapping their old thing and starting fresh. And then if we look at my characters, Aurora and Jeremy, even if there are similar themes in their story now, and even if they do live in a similar world that they used to live, I made those characters when I was 11, so of course things are going to have to change and things are going to have to improve. And like, let's take one of my newer stories, like my webcomic universe. If you guys could see all the notes that I have about their world and how things have changed, how their universe has changed, how scenes have changed, how the lore has changed, it's a lot. And of course, every month I sit here and I tell you about a different character. By telling you about a different character, it expands that world a little bit more, and you get a little bit more understanding of that universe and that plot and things like that. But these are characters that I have been working on for literal years, so if, let's say, by the end of this week you still don't have anything, that is perfectly fine. If you really want a story and you really want a universe for your characters to live in, just be patient with yourself. Work on it when you can, but don't force yourself, because you will get burned out, you will come up with a product that you do not like, and creating it will no longer be fun for you. So just have fun with it, be patient, be kind to yourself, all that stuff. Before I end this video, I did ask you guys on Instagram, I said that weird. Again, my throat's giving out, but we're so close to the end. We'll just keep pushing through. I asked you guys on Instagram if there are any specific themes you wanted me to talk about, any specific advice you wanted, any questions that you had. And while I feel like I answered a lot of them to the best of my abilities in terms of creating a concept and a universe and general plot goes, I feel like I answered a lot of them in this video already, but there are a couple of things that I did want to mention really quick, because I do think that they are relevant to the concept? Whatever. So first off, cliches. The question was, should you avoid cliches? Honestly, the answer is no. Do not be afraid to have cliches in your story. Cliches on their own isn't a bad thing. It all depends on the execution, the impact that they have, what led up to it, and is it out of place with the rest of your world, and does it make sense for the characters? Two of my favorite cliches is the villain to hero trope, and then the childhood friends turned romantic interest lovers trope. Those are things that have been done so many times, and they are things that I will never get sick of. Even though those are two things that are very cliche for a lot of stories, especially for things that are like adventure, fantasy type things, especially the villains to hero ones, there are still so many ways that you can go about it. If we take the villain to hero, there are so many different things that A, cause them to be a villain in the first place, and B, brings them to the good side of things. You know, maybe they were a good guy at one point, but they turned into a villain. Maybe they were always a villain because of XYZ, whatever. And then with characters who were childhood friends, there are so many things that can happen over a lifetime. I can't even get into it. So no, cliches in themselves aren't a bad thing, just it's all about how you use it. And then one more thing I wanted to touch on before I end this video isn't necessarily a specific question I had, but more of a theme of questions that I had. And it was anything from, how do you make your character designs original? How do you come up with an original plot? How do you make a magic system that's completely original? How do you make your story feel original? Anything like that. I just want to say, nothing is original anymore. Like, everything's been done. It can kind of suck to think about, especially from a creative point of view, because you want to be the first to do something. It doesn't matter how much you think your story is original or creative or have never been done before, because it probably has. Coming from my personal experience as somebody on YouTube, there are so many times where I get so excited to talk about a story or a character, and then someone will leave a comment like, your story reminds me of X anime, or your character reminds me of this character, or this world reminds me of this movie, and stuff like that. And maybe at one point it bothered me, but at this point it doesn't anymore, because nothing is original. When you're creating a story, and when you're creating a world, do not think in terms of what's original, what has not been done. Think about what you want to make. Because if you think about what you want to make, it makes your story so much more fun by default because you're having fun making it. This is something that I talked about when I officially announced that I was scrapping Andy's universe and starting over. You can have the most basic concept of a story, but so long as you're having fun with it, it automatically feels so much more fun to enjoy because 9 times out of 10 you can really feel the writers and the artists working hard on it and enjoying what they do. Because if you're having fun with the story, you put more time in it, you put more effort into it, you have a lot more fun making it. And like, let's look at my witch universe again. Concept of witches, they've been done before. Any sort of magical element thing, it's been done before. Even with my characters, Jeremy and Aurora, they have an angel and demon motif. It's been done before, but I have so much fun making them, and a lot of you guys probably noticed that, and that's why a lot of you guys keep coming back to hear more of my stories, because I have such a fun time sharing them. And I feel like when somebody is really enthusiastic about something, it just makes it so much more fun to watch. Don't worry about making something that's never been done before. Just focus on what you want to do, and the people who like it will come and watch. In a totally not creepy way. Alright, well my voice is dying, so I'm gonna end this video here. Something that I have been asked over and over and over again for probably 2 years now, because that's how long I've been working on my webcomic, is how to physically make a webcomic, how to start with all of that, and I guess you can consider this a part 1 of that. I cannot make any promises on when a video will come out on how to physically go about it, and like how to organize notes, what types of notes you should make, how to write scenes and stuff like that. And I'm sorry if you guys were looking forward to this video being that, but I do think that this is a very important place to start because all of this comes before any of that. So if you felt like this video was helpful to you, give it a thumbs up. If you also have any advice that I didn't give in this video, feel free to leave it in the comments down below. Like I said, 2 heads are better than 1, and in this case, there's 100,000 people subscribed to my channel. 100,000 heads are better than 1. So, and if you're new here, hello, my name is Oliver. I hope this video was of any help to you. Zola, don't be rude. I post new videos here every single Wednesday and additional bonus videos whenever I can. I have a lot of fun. Can you tell I've been recording this for too long? I have a lot of fun with art on this channel, as you probably have gathered from this video. I talk a lot about my own original characters, my own stories, so if those are things that you're interested in, consider subscribing. I'd love to have you. And if you want to see more from me, you can follow me on social media. Those will be shown on screen now and linked in the description box below. I mostly post art to Instagram, but also to Twitter. Also share my dumb thoughts on Twitter, so go over there. And if you want to see more videos from me, there will be some on screen now and linked in the icon for you to check out if you want. I'd really appreciate it. Thank you so much. I'm going to go drink some water now. Thanks for watching. Bye. Oh yeah, see you next week. Okay, now I can go. Bye.